right, cool.
Ben's going to take photos for about the first 5 minutes. So we're recording this during the 2020 pandemic. Thanks for
Are we starting?
Here. Yeah, kind of ish. It'll start slow while Ben takes photos, and then we'll kind of take a deeper dive.
Okay.
How's your pandemic going?
Oh, well, first off, Tate, it's really good to see you.
We'll just start with a deep question.
Yeah.
It's really good to see you too.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. And pandemic, wow. I remember very vividly, we had a hatch summit planned in April in Mexico. So like February, March, I was keeping really kind of close finger on the pulse of what was happening out in the world. And it hadn't really fully hit, consciousness.
I was hoping to go to that one.
Yeah, I know. So but I do remember this first week of March, a couple things that I had read, it was happening Italy and I was like, oh shit, this is going to get really serious. And I had that moment of panic of what are we going to do? We had such a strategic plan built out for this year and all of our revenue streams are just going to be eviscerated. And then I'm like, wait a minute, if I'm feeling like this, everyone's feeling like this. We got to, screw how I'm feeling, lead with service and community. And so it's been a really busy year for us. But it was just, inventing a bunch of new programs and so forth. But I miss seeing people interacting.
Yeah, I miss that too. Would you say that, what are you missing out on most?
Well, there's when you asked that question, I thought of two things, and there's what I'm missing out on most, and there's also the kind of the future casting of watching how people's behaviors are changing so drastically to be so protective of themselves, their children, their lives, but it's very antisocial. And what I'm missing most is I'm hoping what used to be can return again in just the casual walking down the street and saying hello and going to a grocery store and, nodding to people. And some of that stuff has just been stripped away. I was hiking on a mountain trail in Montana and you could see people grab their kids and yank them off the trail as you come by and
hold their breath as you walk by.
Yeah. I'm like, wow, what are these kids going to be thinking 10, 15 years from now?
Yeah. From
this. So I miss just that kind of normal interactivity,
Yeah, me too. Coming from the events world, it is kind of strange also.
Yeah. For us, I was just having a conversation on the way here with one of my teammates at Hatch, and had COVID not happened, there's so many things that we would not have done that have now led to big opportunities for Hatch. And one of those is just kind of re-engaging our community as a whole through the global living rooms and the impact labs and that stuff was a spin up of response to COVID, and now we'll never not do them. They're part of our ethos forever, so
cool. They kind of forced you into just accepting what is,
but also recognizing the opportunity that there, the first time we did a global living room in that first week of March, I was looking across several screens of faces of people that I hadn't seen for years, from Hatch Europe, Hatch Mexico, Hatch Latin America, Hatch Montana, 2012, 14, 16, 20, and my heart was melting. And everyone, we were all just like, whoa, we're part of a big family that we didn't even know it was this. We had this, this family even existed. And so in that sense, and we can go into this later, but COVID has invited a whole series of reimaginings that nobody could have guessed that every single industry could grind to a halt in every single country in the course of 10 days. It just wasn't possible.
Yeah.
And now that we know that that's possible, everything's on the table about what's possible.
That's great. Yeah, we'll definitely dive into that. What are you reading anything right now?
Mostly my laptop.
You're reading your laptop, emails and stuff? Any articles?
Emails, articles. I do a ton of research every day. I'm into a lot of systems change, systems thinking. how do we take advantage of this window in time that's inviting us to reimagine what's possible? Like, how can we kind of crowbar that window open a little bit longer to bring solutions to light that other, if it closes too quickly, humans have short memories. So
yeah, so it's kind of, you're diving in fully to this opportunity, it sounds like, and the articles that you're reading right now are pretty aligned with kind of that new restructuring of society.
Yeah, reimagining the systems that have been entrenched for hundreds of years. COVID's just peeled back this top layer that's revealed all of these really brutal flaws in how we've built our structural systems on, systemic oppression and racism and the capitalism and this kind of zero-sum game. So you start looking at so many of these different verticals and domains that can be rethought through in this window where let's not get back to normal. Because that was broken. Let's fix what was broken once, now that we have this opportunity.
Is there an article that's been especially inspiring for you?
I wouldn't say it's an article. It's the people I talk to, and
okay,
it's a lot of the people that I reach out to on a continual basis that advise me and others. Like John Hagel, who used to actually just retired, but he's like a longtime Silicon Valley mentor and ran Deloitte's Center for the Edge, was the founder of that. And he's one of the, I called him in like March or April. I was like, all these tech CEOs consult with him. Like, John, are all these clients, are they calling you? He's like, yeah. I'm like, what are they asking? How to get back to normal. Like, what do you say? Not to get back to normal. I'm like, thank you.
Nice. That's great. Yeah. Before we're going to dive into all of that, I want to just kind of reach back into your history box. And have you accessed it yet? That was pretty quick. Yeah, not quite as quick as a computer.
I just took the mystery machine.
What kind of toys did you have growing up?
Box and stick.
Box and stick?
Yep.
It's interesting. There's a debate this weekend called OK Boomer, and a lot of the questions that I've asked to each generation it's really interesting to see kind of where people align on the economic scale by just seeing what kind of toys they had. They're either like sticks and rocks, or all the way to super soakers.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful overlay to kind of look through as a lens. There were two others that had a profound impact on my life, and Legos and Lincoln Logs.
I was a Lego kid for sure.
Yeah, and I got kind of secondhand Legos from Salvation Army and so forth. But like, holy cow, what you could build with Legos was like the imagination.
Was there any genre that you particularly liked?
Of Lego?
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of pre-packaged, like Star Wars kit.
Yeah.
It was more just like a box of Legos.
It was before they designed everything.
Yeah.
I got really into Castle Legos, and my friend Cisco had the pirate Legos, and we would have these epic battles. It was awesome.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
Camera was the one that my mom gave me. I wouldn't call it a toy necessarily, but that was another thing that I could kind of trace back a significant inflection point in my life to that moment when I was gifted that camera.
Cool. How old were you?
I'm fourth grade.
Fourth grade, you got your first camera?
Yeah.
Are we good?
I'm good.
Do you have more?
Good.
Cool.
Yeah. I think I'm good. That's good.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Good to see you, brother.
Yeah, you too. I'll see you.
So, fourth grade, tell me a little bit about your childhood from your camera on.
Well, I'll tell you just a quick little snippet pre-camera, but my mom walked out of an abusive relationship. My dad had some mental health issues and was diagnosed schizophrenic later on. All that stuff kind of came to light, but she left the house with 25 cents in her pocket, said she was going to the grocery store, and me under one arm and this 25 cents in her pocket that she used at the corner phone booth to call the only person she knew in that particular town, which was Denver, which we had just moved to. And anyway, I ended up working like 4 jobs simultaneously for the next few years to put herself through her first family's first college degree. From that was Minneapolis, and then we came to Bozeman when I was in 2nd grade, and she put herself through her master's degree. And in the government subsidized housing that we were in, they were pretty run down. Like, we kind of got bumped around to a few of them because they would get condemned and bulldozed. But I remember sitting on the steps of one of these apartment kind of duplex complexes, and that's when this person came next door from, like two houses away, to take our picture. My mom and I were just kind of sitting on the steps, and he's like, "Do you mind if I'm like, "Yeah, sure." But he later brought that photograph over. But I remember like that moment where I was like staring at that camera, like, what does that do? How does it work? He's pointing this thing at us, like, what happens next? Like trying to kind of, so from that point forward, like, I just became, once my mom kind of saw that interest in me and got me a camera, which was like a big lift at that point in our lives.
Wow.
I just remember receiving that gift and I was like, whoa. Like, I would, I went to school in Irving, which is like the small school in Bozeman, Montana. And I would walk to school and document my path to school every day. Like, I'd take pictures of the crosswalking guards and this particular lavender bush and, all these, I was just like started to, but what it did is it helped me kind of evolve my lens and how I would see the world around me. And still to this day, like when I'll walk through, when I travel, like I'll go down a street with a friend and we're just kind of chatting, and I'm just like randomly clicking things. And then later we'll go through a kind of a slideshow of images, and they're like, wait, where was that? Where was that? Where was that? Like, that camera at a young age helped me see things that other people don't necessarily pay attention to, like looking up, looking down, looking at, just like zooming in, zooming out. And
yeah.
So my childhood was full of that sort of stuff.
I'm trying to recollect a time other than today where I didn't see you with a camera on. So you were in Denver, and your mom left an abusive relationship with 25 cents, and that moved you to Minneapolis. And then you later made it to Bozeman for your education, where I think I know the picture you're talking about, you kind of laying on your mom's lap.
Yeah.
And that's the photo that really made you love photography, because you kind of had that curiosity of, what's this guy pointing at me?
Yeah. Well, that's the one that sparked the curiosity. Once I got the camera, that's where I fell in love with what I could do. And, like, holy crap, I could take a photograph and then, save up enough money to go get this thing dropped off at this building that when I come back, they give me prints that I can then see what was in that camera. It all felt like magic.
Yeah. I wasn't quite that young. I went through a great photography phase in high school that I just love. And I've rekindled that love recently, and it's been awesome.
I believe that the camera enhances your empathy. And just seeing things through a lens, and you start to just see things a little bit differently. And of course, empathy is seeing things through someone else's, like to have lived that experience and to feel that experience, to put to the thought exercise of like, what are they feeling? Why are they feeling that? To kind of like go down the kind of a list of layers of, but I think that for me at least, the camera really opened that up to start to question kind of what's below the surface of what you're seeing.
That's great. I like that. I appreciate that kind of framework and the lens that you can kind of gain empathy through. When, what did your mom do at that time for work-wise?
Well, she was cleaning houses, cleaning toilets. On a good year, there was one year specifically I remember that she would kind of nanny and house sit, and that meant that we got to go stay in nice homes for a little while. And so we would, I remember the first time I walked into one of those houses, I was like, is this someone's house? Like, people live like this? Like, this is a whole different, like, what's possible, How does one get to be one of these people living in one of these places. And like, look at these toys. And like, you know, this is like a kind of a mind expander.
Just the difference in class.
Yeah, the difference in class and I mean, you know, my childhood, even though it was like the homes we were in were being bulldozed and condemned, and there was one year we lived in 4 or 5 different homes, and one family, really nice family, like donated their cabin to us, and that cabin was up in Bear Canyon. We had to hike up this hill to go to this cabin that had 0 electricity, running water, and plastic sheets for the windows, and it was winter, and it was really, really cold. So we'd like carry the water up this hill, but through all of that, I just remember like I never really felt like sorry for myself or like this was bad way to live or anything. Like it always just felt like an adventure. And yet then when I would start to kind of get exposed to these other worlds, it's an interesting conundrum. You're like, you start comparing.
I like that a little bit better.
Yeah, well, geez, these people it feels so comfortable in here. Like what?
Running
like,
warm water.
Yeah.
So, but you had never experienced it, so you didn't know the difference.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's the baseline of what you have as your experience. You know, I was on a conversation earlier today with a couple of friends. We're building a workshop out, and one of those is really kind of unpacking the lenses that we grow through our experiences, through culture and unconscious bias and your backgrounds and the norms and you know, like they just stack up. Like what you're looking through, almost like a contact lens, just gets like thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. It's a prism. It starts refracting what's reality, and you now have this POV, this point of view, this perspective that is not accurate because, I mean, it's accurate to you, but then you and I could be looking at the same thing and seeing it 1,000 different ways, right? It's like
totally. Yeah, it's like social science is so hard to pinpoint because all of the points of gathering data have the layers that you're talking about. I guess it reminds me in integral facilitation, one of my favorite pieces was shadow, and it's the side of us that we choose not to acknowledge, or don't know exists.
Yeah, or both.
Yeah.
They're like, once you know it exists, you're like, go away.
Yeah. Sweep it back under the carpet, please. So, and then you wound up, your mom got a job on the Indian reservation.
Yeah, she graduated grad school I guess I was just graduated 6th grade. I was going into 7th grade. And I remember her coming home was like, hey, I'm applying for these jobs, and like, wow, like real jobs. Like we can go do this now. Like we're going to level up. And there was one teaching job in 2 Dot, which seemed, and this is no kidding, right? Like
I've been to 2 Dot.
Have you? Like, I've still not been to 2 Dot, but I remember like thinking to myself, like 2 Dot, that sounds cool. And, like open up a map and looking at it, and it was like population, I don't know, 400, 300, whatever. It was like, And then the other one was Rocky Boy Indian Reservation. And like, nothing crossed my mind that would be different to go to Rocky Boy, right? I was just like, oh, great. Well, like, whatever it is, it's better than where we are now because I had a new baseline to consider of, now we are in this trajectory toward improving our lives.
Because your mom had a real job now.
A real job, yeah. She graduated and I was excited, and we're like, off we went. And
to Rocky Boy. What tribe is in Rocky Boy?
Chippewa Cree.
Chippewa Cree. Yeah,
and it's up by Havre, Montana. If you're not really that familiar with Montana, it's fairly close to the High Line and kind of close to Canada. And it's the Rocky Mountain front, the Rocky Mountain Plains. Like it's super flat. It's windy. There's a serenity to it, but it's also a really kind of sad and broken place. When I was there, I haven't been back for a long time, but I just mean like the very first day we got there with the moving van, and they had paid, for a van to bring our stuff up, and I was helping unload the stuff. I couldn't wait to get that last box off the truck, and I was running it into the house, and it's like, boom, last one done. Like, because there's these 3 kids that were playing basketball down in the court below where this kind of row of teacher housing was. So got the last box in, ran down these like super long stairs across the street onto this basketball court. I'm like, hey. And the basketball is like bonk, bonk, bonk. And there's this pause, and I'm like, this face of my, I'm like, just so excited to be in a new place with new people, with potentially new friends. And one guy walked all the way over to, like, not whatever it was, like 10 feet, 15 feet, walked over to me, kind of stopped, looked at me, bounced the basketball one more time, bonk, and then punched me in the face. And my nose exploded, like blood came out everywhere. I was just like, and I just remember I'd never been hit before. And I was like really confused. I was like, what did I say?
And you had just come down excitedly to play basketball and said, hey.
Yeah, like, hey guys. And then pop. And it, took me a couple seconds to process, like, they don't want me there. Turned around and went back up the stairs. And that was kind of the beginning of a pretty tumultuous, 2 years of my life. Like, I lived there for 2 years, 7th and 8th grade. I moved there playing cello, and I left, lifting weights with a chip on my shoulder.
You were kind of the only white kid on the reservation at that time.
Yeah.
Were there any other?
No, I was the only white kid in the school. They called me Little Custard.
Little Custard.
Yeah, which even at that time was kind of like, didn't fully unpack all the nuance there.
He's kind of romanticized in Western culture still.
Yeah. I mean, lots of things.
Lots of things
in American history are still romanticized about systemic racism and all the shitty things that happened for us to even land in this country.
I think of things like Little House on the Prairie, where settling just seems so innocent.
Yeah. Yeah, and before the settling could happen, they had to kind of go, quote unquote, cleanse all the people that were already living there to, take control of that land. It was like, I just, I left there. I was the entertainment almost to a degree for 2 years for a lot of those kids were, the school bell would ring at 3 o'clock and and everyone would get up and bolt out of the classroom, and I would sit there and wait for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. And then the teacher, who would always be doing kind of like some kind of end of day stuff, would finally like close his notebook and be like, hey, we gotta go. I'm like, yeah. And I would, like, cue the James Bond music. It was like bump, 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 bump. It's like if I could get from that school to, across the schoolyard, across that basketball court, across that street, up these really long stairs before anybody caught me, like that was a victory that day. Otherwise, I would just get held, tackled and held down, and everyone could take their turn kicking my ass.
Just every day?
Every other day. Like, I got better at different things. I was finding different routes out the back way that could go up through this other trail. And, I started like getting, partially from survival, but also I just, I didn't want to get my ass kicked. But it became almost like a tactical chess thing at that point. And, I remember running into those kids 3 years later in a basketball game, in a high school basketball tournament that a bunch of Class A, Class C, Class B schools had come to, and I at this point I was wrestling and just I'd been lifting weights and I had kind of a chip on my shoulder, and I came around the corner and there was this group of these kids that used to bully me, and they're all standing there, and there was this moment I was like, man, I was like licking my chops for a second. I was like, wow, now I can completely.
You bulked up quite a bit.
Yeah, I'd like kept growing and they'd stopped growing. And like, there was this moment, was like, whoop, I'm in charge now. And I started walking toward them, and I just remember this kind of visceral, kind of like this flash of images of hundreds of years of hatred of like, the why. Like, why do they feel like this? And where does that hatred come from? And who, I mean, like, just, it was a moment, it was my first kind of exercise that, well, viscerally to my memory, of empathy. I look back at that moment and just was like, suddenly I was like, whoa, like I've been given a real gift as a white male who traditionally doesn't ever experience anything like that before. Like it, if you grow up black, you're black your whole life, and people are profiling you and making snap judgments across the street from you. And in my case, I left the reservation and wasn't in that dynamic anymore. And yet it just kind of set a tone for, I think for me, for the rest of my life of like, really wanting to kind of keep open arms to everyone that I possibly could, and kind of reset my values on acceptance and being more attracted to the fringe dwellers than those people that are on the edge of the room that are kind of raising a little bit of trouble.
The fringe dwellers.
The fringe dwellers.
I like that. Yeah, I mean, so you approached him at this basketball game much bigger, and when you just thought about licking your chops and fighting back, it just dawned on you this thought to consider why there's this deep hatred.
Yeah.
Maybe not for you specifically, but for your culture, for our culture.
Yeah. Where does that come from? Asking yourself the question of why, like someone might feel like this, is that first step of like, I could just feel the rage kind of building up in myself. And as I stepped toward them, there was that, the kind of the visceral flash of like all these images of like hate and murder. And it's, it was a moment of realization where you recognize that you can be an additional link in that chain, or remove yourself from that part of the chain. Like I'm not going to be a conduit to continue that forward.
That kind of hatred.
Yes.
Why did you want retribution or to reconcile with them? Or did you?
Well, the retribution part was like, I've been held down and kicked in my head and back and, punched and so forth for like a couple years now. And, 2 years later, like that's not going to happen, because in 8th grade, I just started like working out and doing push-ups and my mom taught art. And I was like, I'm rebelling against the art world. I'm going to be muscular and an athlete. And I'm just going to be able to take care of myself, basically, was really what it kind of boiled down to. And, retribution was just like, I'm capable of reversing the tables. And now I can seize that opportunity, but maybe now is not the opportunity it's not an opportunity to be seized. Basically, it was an opportunity to learn something.
As a white person who was poor and fought for everything on the way up, where do you see your place in the world amongst the Black Lives Matter movement and Indigenous history?
That's an evolving question, rapidly evolving. I mean, especially the way that you asked that question, where do I see my place in the world? Like I feel like I've been, in my mind, an ally since that age of 8th grade. That being said, like this year, 2020, in the era of COVID, George Floyd's murder was like a real pivotal moment for a lot of people, and it was for me. I just remember seeing a post from a friend of mine, Reggie Tidwell, in Asheville, North Carolina, who's black, and he's like, I'm just afraid to raise my son in a world where he could be shot and killed before he's ever asked a question. And just the way that he framed that, like, I don't know. I mean, there's probably a lot of kind of layers to why it hit me right then. Like we're all still stripped so bare right now during COVID to begin with, and stretched thin and like this weight on us. But that was like a straw that kind of broke everyone. And it definitely did me. I just started doing a ton of research on, like, what does the police brutality look like in other countries, and what's the ratio of, African Americans being pulled over versus shot at? Like what are all the data points? Like, I was starting to kind of lean into wanting to understand the data, and to where these mental models are being projected from and how they're being empowered. And so to answer your question, like it's a rapidly evolving understanding of my place, and I don't even exactly know what that is yet. I just do know that we're looking at a lot of opportunities, every opportunity we can, to use platforms that we've been a part of building, and offering those platforms out, and trying to get people of color and founders of color and women of color, like on the microphone, on boards, in speaking opportunities. Like, it's become a more heightened, like climate change and education. Those things have always kind of been ever present for me. Equity and racial justice are like, none of it works without all of them working. And so it's been very much accelerated this year for me.
Yeah, I see. You could probably call them refugees at this point, of the flood of people moving to inland. And you can definitely tell the income inequality, because the wealthy people are the only ones who can afford to leave.
Yeah. I mean, COVID is really, I have this very kind of specific visual in my mind. It's almost like the top layer of your skin, like, just when you peel that back, and like, oh, I have nice complexion. But when you peel it back and you start seeing all the shit underneath it that's working and not working, COVID has really put a magnifying glass on the gap of wealth, the gap of privilege, the gap of, most people don't have the luxury to leave the situation that they're in. They're in shared housing, it's tight containment, their healthcare is not as good. I mean, Montana has had a record year of real estate. People are moving here from San Francisco, New York City, Chicago, like urban areas. I'm not exactly sure where it goes from here, but like, urban probably won't be the same. Like, most people that were using Montana as the place that they would kind of go to twice a year, second homes, this is where they feel safe, and they're reconnecting to nature, and they're realigning a new relationship with nature. And yeah, that's directly tied to, the privilege you might have to be able to go do that, because not everyone has that opportunity to go reconnect with nature. And I think, I grew up small town Montana, went to Los Angeles for 9 years, came back, started Hatch almost 18 years ago, considered moving back to a city a few years ago under the auspices of, like, am I being selfish by being tucked away up here in the mountains? Should I be in a place that has a higher collision rate of serendipitous, meetings of people that together we can go make impact? And
like going to New York, or just staying in
LA and San
highly,
Francisco,
yeah.
for me specifically, like, New York doesn't have enough green space. I love New York, but like, but at least in LA I can go to the edge of the continent and stare at the ocean and not see a human for 20 minutes, and then go back into whatever zone I'm in. But I was like, making the move to accelerate our work with Hatch by moving back into the city. And I'm just really grateful that didn't happen.
Yeah, because most things are digital now anyway, and you have that connection. And I think with your Hatch summits, inviting people to a place like Montana is really valuable to them.
Well, that would never change. Even if I lived in LA, I'd still bring people to Montana. I mean, I had a company in Los Angeles. We would do events all the time, and once we got to I moved back to Montana and started Hatch. I would joke like this, the second year in, I was like, wow, it's easier to get people to come from Los Angeles to Montana than it is to come from Burbank to Santa Monica.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't get them to come over the hill, but I can get them to get on a plane and come to this amazing space. You
Sure.
know?
Yeah. That big playground. Is there anything wrong with loving your own race? Is it racist or anything to love your own race?
What an interesting question. I mean, first of all, I'm not an expert on this. It's like whatever answer I have will be completely personal through a lens, and I'm not even sure how to answer the question. It's like, I think everyone should love their own race. It's like, if you can, it's like loving yourself. Like, if there's an asterisk next to it, then, Hatch has been, since the day we founded, was like premised on Hatch a Better World. But then through the evolution, and our good mutual dear friend Pete's drama was like real instrumental, and part of this is like unpacking this notion, like, you can't really hatch a better world until you hatch a better you. And to hatch a better you have to look inside, see what is within you, understand the darkness and the shadows, recognize your superpowers, and love yourself. And in loving yourself, that means loving your race. It means loving other people's races. I don't think that you're necessarily going to be effective at offering that embrace to anyone else if you're not offering that embrace to yourself and what your heritage is and where you came from.
That's great. I like that answer. It's hard to be white, and
There's that.
Well,
we feel guilty like sometimes, but there's a different question. I mean, there's been a lot of times this year where I was like, Jesus, being white, male, and privilege is like, what can I do to make up for that?
Yeah. Do you, so what do you do? Do you feel that necessity to make up for that?
Well, I'm motivated, and I'm, do a lot of listening. I do a lot of listening. This is definitely not the time to be an expert in anything for me, from my perspective. So there's a lot of people whose voices have not been heard for a long time, and they need to be heard. It's time for those voices to not just be heard in kind of a condescending, like, we'll listen sort of way. It's just like, now is the time for collective humanity to rise up together and to recognize the strength and power in each other and unify. And if we can't unify humanity, this will be the beginning of the third great extinction.
The third great extinction, and humanity kind of in this chaos moment of uncertainty. How do you feel about uncertainty?
This is an interesting question too. I've been having this conversation with a couple people in our organization, because in March, when there was this sort of, oh shit moment for us, and then recognizing, kind of zooming out, it's like going from the me to we. What's the status on planet Earth right now? Like, and it's not good. Just curious, do you edit these?
Depends. We've kind of been embracing the more
flaws.
rawness. Yeah, I think.
Love it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. What is your relationship to uncertainty?
Right. So funny that it just spun my imagination into such a little zone there. I grew up in an environment of uncertainty. Like, I never really knew what was around the corner ever. It was not, if my pattern got broken, I was going to be discombobulated or upset. So I just feel sort of well suited for we don't know what's going to happen. And at the beginning of this year, when we started launching the Global Living Room and the Impact Labs, I remember this one conversation very specifically with one of our team members, like, so are we completely changing our theory of change? And like, nope, the theory of change is exactly the same. It's like connecting people to resources and each other to help accelerate solutions to hatch a better world. But we can no longer do that in person right now. So the uncertainty for me, I'm just kind of planning for the uncertainty, and I feel fairly well suited for it.
Yeah, I see that. I see you being well suited for that. And you are. When you created Hatch, you reference real life superheroes. What is a real life superhero?
Well, you are one, Tate.
Me?
Yeah, you're a real life superhero. Yeah, since I've met you, which was, gosh, might have been like 6 years ago. So,
It's been a while, yeah.
time is so fluid. I can't even really remember anymore, especially during COVID. But like, you are always on the front lines of advocacy and harnessing media and the arts and creativity to tell stories, and not just for self-serving, but to beautify parts of Bozeman. And like, from the moment I met you, I was like, oh, that guy's a super dude. He's a hatcher. He's like, and these are kind of internal dialogues I have with myself when I meet someone. But, the short answer to your question is, at first, what I thought was real life superhero I was inspired by this conversation that I had with this, I thought I was moving to the epicenter of creative genius in Los Angeles. And like, I'd be inspired every day. A couple years in, I'm like, where are they? I meet this Czechoslovakian composer that's teaching deaf kids how to read and play music. And like, I was like awestruck with like how it worked. Like, what are the physics and the mechanics? Like, tell me more about how, I want to know everything. And the next day I met this scientist that was on this team to piece the ozone layer back together. I'm like, you're like a real life superhero. Is it working? You're like saving the world. And that's kind of where that criteria matrix started. And it was a way to help reframe not just athletes and entertainers, the people that we know as household names and famous people, but scientists and teachers and people on the front lines of social impact. But where the real meat of it is like, we're all born super. Everyone is a real life superhero. Like, the opportunity, the invitation is to go seek that out, to ask yourself some questions and to find what it is within you that's like kind of that Venn diagram of what makes you special, that's kind of unique, that you don't really notice in a lot of other people. What makes you smile? Like, what are you doing? What makes you the happiest when you're doing that? And what the world needs most. And like, there's a Venn diagram in there, right? The Japanese have something kind of similar called
the Ikigai.
Yes, the Ikigai.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Ikigai, yeah.
Ikigai, yeah.
It's the reason for being. Like, it's kind of your purpose, your existence, you're living in. And with that, you can tap into your real life superpowers. And once you define that, like, all the molecules in your body conspire to manifest that best self. And they're already kind of going to work without even like, and you just kind of just follow along to a certain degree.
Yeah, you can't get away from it.
Yeah, now it's been
I can't
envisioned. You're just like, okay, well, I'm moving in that direction if you're a conscious human working toward evolution. But
yeah. Well, thank you for calling me a real life superhero. That's awesome. I've had great time and a lot of great influences through you and the Hatch Network. So it's definitely served a great purpose in my life. And yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for being one, Tate.
Yeah. What other than me?
Thank you for activating on your human potential.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I would go insane, I think, if I didn't do Blunderbuss or Interchange.
Oh, there's no question. You are a creator. You are a manifester. You're an engine of creativity, and like that sparks the fellow sitting back over here behind the curtain, Pat running tech, and Bryant, who just left, and this whole ecosystem that I just walked out of in Blunderbuss. Like, they all have opportunities because of this vision that you have of like, let's create this modern version of a co-working, co-living, we don't know exactly what yet, next space, and you're manifesting it. So
I kind of closed my eyes and just put it on what it was on the wall.
Yeah.
No, it's been
gotta ask the
chasing
universe.
energy.
You got to chase the energy.
Yeah.
But you have to also open your mind up to feel that energy. Like there was a mentor, Lee Poole, who once told me the story. Like it just had such an impact on me. He was like, and this guy had a lot of vision. The founder of Moonlight Basin. He's like, when I go to sleep at night, I lay down next to my wife. I say the things I'm grateful for in my mind, and then I just kind of mentally reach over and open up the window and put my satellite dish out and point it up to the universe and say, ready to receive. And when I wake up, I have all these amazing ideas. But if you don't ask the universe, it's not going to assume that you are looking for answers. He's like, most people just forget to ask. And
yeah, that's true. Do people forget that they can ask? Do they feel unworthy, or
maybe unworthy? Maybe they're not believing that any sort of system is for them, which in many cases it's not. But the universal system is at a larger scale, and I think
it's for anyone who's receptive.
Yeah, receptive and kind of actively seeking it, just like saying, like, I'm ready. Bring me some energy, some knowledge, an insight, a sign, or whatever. I'm not even getting, specifically religious or anything here. It's just ask the universe, this living system of all these things that are connected, that have this collective intelligence.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of just everyone who you surround yourself with, other than me, who are your biggest superheroes in your life.
There's so many. My mom is definitely the original, working multiple jobs and putting herself through a couple degrees and just everything that we went through together. Like she's an exceptional human being. And the people that that I'm spending my time with, like right now, like I had this realization a couple of years ago at Hatch. Hatch, the summit ended, and we all came together in this like massive group hug, and it felt so good, and then it felt even better, and then it felt so good, like I had tears coming down my face, and I was like, "Whoa, what is that? What is that? What is that emotion?" And I remember just like I kind of like looked up. I was like, "Wow, I built a family," because I grew up without a family, and it was just like my first kind of realization. It was like, so that family, I mean, I don't take any of it for granted, that I get to pick up the phone and have the most beautiful conversations with the most incredible minds that are intelligent and heartfelt, and just think, teach me every conversation that I have. Like, I keep evolving because of the people that we've curated and brought together and cultivated, and it's been remarkable. And yeah,
I've seen Hatch grow and pivot through different iterations. How do you define Hatch today?
It's so funny when we asked that question. I just did a Rolodex of all the different ways I've described it over the last 17 years. But your question was, how do I describe it today? Hatch is a global network of people, thought leaders in every domain you can imagine. It's a cross-disciplinary. It's a cross-pollination of diverse industries, ages, ethnicities, generations. So, the premise is, if you're able to, if you take a bunch of area experts to scan a problem, they're going to get a 2D output of that problem. If you put a bunch of diverse mindsets, perspectives around a challenge and scan that problem, so to speak, you'll get this three-dimensional holographic output of that problem, daylighting blind spots, assumptions, opportunities for innovation and improvement, and people that are asking what if, because they're not in that industry and they're not laden with those rules. And the more times you can ask what if, the closer you are to hitting a breakthrough. And so that's actually not exactly how I explain Hatch these days, but that's the riff that is currently Like we're bringing people together to accelerate solutions for each other and for the greater world. So we find people that are on the front lines of these various industries, and you know, the UN has 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, poverty, education, gender equity, race equity, like to find people that are on the front lines of fighting for those, you know, superheroes that are on the front lines fighting for justice in these different zones, the environment, education, and so forth. Bringing those people together, they're already attuned to a certain frequency. When you bring that group together, there is a exponential factor that happens. You know, it's like 1 + 1 = 11. Like human potential is exponential, and like those frequencies start to harmonize, and it's really, it sounds kind of, you know, a little woo-woo and ethereal, but like I'm so present and witness to watching it happen from, okay, we got 15 countries here and multiple states and people from different industries, and everyone's just like getting off a plane, and most of them are wondering like, why am I here? What was this thing that I got invited to? Like, who talked me into this? And like, and then you can see that arc over 3.5 days where this becomes a very coalesced, intentional group. It's focusable, and then you start to stretch that out over like multiple cohorts over years. You know, this would have been the fall of our 25th summit, and we're going to do something virtual to kind of celebrate like an all-star reunion. But we were putting a lot of time, energy, and thought into, you know, that benchmark. But Hatch is really about solving challenges with each other, for each other. It's a mycelial network. It's very reciprocal. There's, you know, you put 9 people in a circle, and everyone has an ask, and 100% of the time, someone has a solution for that. So when you start to see those masterminds at play, if you're accelerating, you know, 100 people that can go impact the lives of 100 million, that exponential, you know, the human potential is exponential. That math starts to get really exciting and kind of powerful. So we started building tools around how to track that as well. So Hatch is a little bit hard to explain.
It is hard to explain. It's hard to put a finger on, I think, that I've heard it described as. You talk about the Sustainable Development Goals and all these people, superheroes who are problem solving these 17 goals and all of the different iterations of the different problems of each goal. And you created Hatch Labs, where you work to find a project or create something new to solve these goals. Will you tell me a little bit about the Hatch Labs?
Yeah, certainly. So like, you know, after, I don't know, 10 years or so of curating these groups that, you know, and Hatch started as a different model. It was a festival model. It was like outward facing. We marketed. We had a full page ad in the Variety magazine in Hollywood. We brought movie stars in. We did film premieres and
fashion shows in the middle of the street.
Fashion shows, yeah. But it was always built on mentorship and cross-disciplinary. You know, that cross-disciplinary part is critical of like the NASA astronaut with the filmmaker, with the architect and the journalist. Like, people are in their zones and they're the best in the world at what they do, but they need, you know, these kind of crowbar in the spoke moments to just jar that thinking and to give a new reframe. So we were starting to witness, you know, some of the value in that, and then we're like, wow, geez, just remember like one time this plane took off and I was like saying goodbye. I was like thinking about all of the different people that were on that plane. Like, holy smokes, like the people in that plane like literally could help save the world. Like, we're not making best use of their time while we're together. Like, granted, we all need R&R and vacations and so forth, but like, geez, this is an opportunity. So we started doing 2 days off the grid, 2 days on the grid. And the 2 days off the grid were like all the people that were flying in from all these different places. We'd go out to the Double T River Ranch and do a think tank, and then we'd come into town. But we did it twice, 2 years in a row. And we just noticed like, well, everyone kind of formed this bubble, so to, like, it's kind of like this, like they forged relationships. It was like, came into town, and like there was 2 bubbles and they weren't meshing. So we just realized like, okay, don't break the yoke. Everyone's got to enter together, exit together. And that's when we started moving into the labs model, because it almost felt like a responsibility. We'd brought together and found and done the research to, curate some really interesting, beautiful humans. Now, when someone says, "Hey, I have a problem," I'm like, "Tell me about your problem. Like, what's your problem?" And in the back of my mind, it's almost like a visual, like this, these like encyclopedias just spread
Which
out
one?
behind
Yeah.
me of like, which book can I pull off the shelf to help this problem? And in that kind of thought exercise was like, wow, we could go into our library and like pull off, a Worley and a San Rahi and a Liz Dozier and an Erica Mackey. And like, you can, Philip Shepard, you can start to kind of cull together this like David Yakos, like 2-time toy inventor of the year. Well, let's build a team of people that are really used to fluidity, uncertainty, solving problems. I don't care what industry you're in. This is the A team. We paratroop in like a bunch of ninjas. And then there was this kind of thought that like once we're on the inside of some of these larger machines that we have an opportunity to help at least share a narrative that they have a significant finger on a lever that can shift global consciousness or behaviors, just incremental, Buckminster Fuller's trim tab concept. So the labs began as a way to recognize that we had aggregated all of these resources. Now we could kind of pull them together at certain times and point them at something to accelerate a solution. And, when COVID hit this year, we had several labs lined up that we were really excited about. And, one of them was kind of a continuation from something that started last year. We had a partnership with Soul Buffalo and Dave Ford, who had this amazing vision to put together a bunch of, executives from some of the largest creators of plastics in the world. Plastics, by the way, is a real crisis. Like, plastics get shipped from every country to only 2 countries where they say that they're disposing of it, but what they really do is just dump it in the ocean, and then it starts to kind of follow the currents and gets together in the center of in these gyres, and starts to just kind of grind on itself and particulate and becomes these very small microplastics, these little mini beads that then get swept up into this whole recycling of the earth, precipitation, evaporation, precipitation. Like, they're now finding microplastics in the mountain streams of Montana and Colorado. So it's in our food streams. We took 150 executives just, from some of the largest creators of plastics in the world, like Dow Chemical and SAP. SAP not being one of the largest creators of plastic, like Nestle, Coca-Cola, with some historically kind of adversarial relationships. Greenpeace, World Wildlife Federation, there's like a long list, but like onto the ship to do these lab sprints, and kind of trapped together for 3.5 days. No one's getting off the boat until we would take them out to this, like, the plastic gyre, and Dave and Soul Buffalo, they have this amazing vision for these immersive solutions and high capacity. Like, these adventures are like, the logistics are terrifying. Like, I'm so glad that they're so good at that. And we came in for some of the softer programming, the curation, and the wildcard thinkers, and the labs, and so watching the labs take shape over the course of 3.5 days, there's 4 of those projects that are currently significant impactors and funded. And there's, we published a 120-page output report on that. So this year we were about to do those labs again. We had a series of them, and we kind of pivoted into started the Impact Labs, which is a virtual experiment. Like, we had no idea if this was going to work. It was a complete experiment. And so we had 150 people sign up, 12 countries, 34 states across the U.S. on 4 topic areas: education, environment, equity, racial justice, and mobilize the vote. And from those 150 that ended up like kind of whittling down to about 135, made 20 teams on those 4 topic areas. And then we launched 20 of those projects to a group of implementation and funding partners and then they got first look at those opportunities to see these brilliant ideas. And we had, 14-year-olds and 84-year-olds in the same group. We had people from across different, it was expanding their worldviews. There's so many kind of byproducts of the experience that aren't just the product itself, it's the process of that experience that we're really excited to go share with, a lot of companies kind of going forward now that we've prototyped and proven that model out.
This is pre-election that we're recording this, so it'll be a little bit of a time capsule. You launched you mentioned it a second ago, the No Vote Left Behind project, and that was one of the labs that was created during your Impact Labs. What's your goal with it?
Well, there's. Let me say a couple of things before I answer the question of what the goal is. That lab was kind of sparked in the Impact Labs, as you mentioned, and one of the guests that we had brought on to hear the pitches and so forth was Aloe Black, a musician who's amazingly talented.
Love him, yeah.
He's an activist, and so at the end of the Impact Labs, I reached out to him. I was like, Aloe, I want to do a quick follow up with you and get your take on what resonated with you? Was there anything of interest and so forth? And in that conversation, I was like, what are you thinking a lot about these days? Like, what keeps you up at night? And he's like, well, the election and mobilizing the vote. And I'm like, tell me more. And so in that conversation, we're like, well, let's team up and do something together. And he started, the Music Artists Coalition. I reached out to John Quigley from the Artists for Amazonia, Tim Daly from the Creative Coalition. And we started building this network of networks, this coalition of a bunch of nonprofits that have amazing networks and built, the one that's coming up on, well, depending on when this airs, maybe it already happened, but the 1 week countdown on October 27th with Alec Baldwin joining us and a few other new folks. But what do I hope to accomplish is really simple. It's like mobilize the vote. And that sounds kind of, like whatever. 2 weeks ago was a bit of a different agenda because there was a different timeline. This is the very first election in history that we've had to not just say, go vote, but hey, what's your voting plan? Because maybe you don't feel safe going to a courthouse. Maybe you need to send a mail-in ballot. What are the cutoff times for your state's mail-in ballots? And it's different for every state. There's no standardization there. So what is your voting plan? Was this is all kind of new vernacular, and but what do we hope to accomplish this next one and then the last one combined is the process feels flawed, and so a lot of people have become a little bit disenfranchised with does my vote matter? And it's kind of like saying does your voice matter? Because if you don't think your voice matters, then you fall into apathy and everything kind of is a downhill slide from there. If you don't care, you're not going to influence anyone else caring. There's going to be this whole domino effect of people not caring. And then the people that actually are very strategic about manipulating those situations and circumstances that do care because they want to feed a certain agenda will win. And so to mobilize people to kind of re-inspire them and if you don't cast your vote, you're essentially kind of holding up a white flag. And the hope is that none of us are going to, none of us are holding up a white flag. The hope is that none of us are surrendering, that we're mobilized. And if everyone votes, then, let the results be what they may be. But at least we know that last election, 2016, 76,000 votes separated the election in 3 key swing states. When you think about that number and the amount of people that we have, and 52%, I think, voted, and Jesus, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential, human potential sitting dormant that's not being tapped into, and tap into it. How do we tap into it? That I think is the question of the now during COVID. Rather than just continuing to focus on the disparity of the gap, how do we bridge the gap? How do we make more fairness and equity resonate those voices, and a lot of voices have started to surface during COVID, which has been really inspiring to see, specifically the youth voice. Like this next generation is not having it. You know, it's like,
I love Gen Z.
oh my God. And I do too. And I'm inspired.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, go away. Nope, we're not going away.
We're taking over.
Yeah. We're taking over what you're leaving us.
Right.
But we're going to take over a little bit before you leave it to us.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Whether you like it or not. What keeps you up at night?
Oh, geez, all the things we've been talking about. I mean,
You talked about at the beginning of this pandemic, it's causing all these layers to be peeled back. And it's offering this kind of reflective time and maybe potential to reimagine. So I want to get into that, but what is keeping you up at night tonight?
oh, geez, that's a whole different spin you just put on that one. You surprised me. Tonight.
Dinner with the family.
There is well, I'm going to miss that, but there's an interesting, interesting is such a kind of shallow word, but like, I have this kind of, I have this throttle of kind of an empathy funnel almost. Like, I minimize how many times I open up the news. You know, some would say you should be really well informed. Like, if I inform myself every single day, I'd be a wreck. Like, I couldn't even be productive. Like, I need to distance myself, because it's also like this. There's like this up and down, zigzag, zigzag, zigzag. If you like zoom out, like it kind of, you know, starts to look like a flat line, depending on your perspective. So like, what happens on a day-to-day basis? Granted, I want to have finger on the pulse. I have an intuition for, you know, I want to be informed. Yet, I don't want to debilitize myself to the point where I can't do anything. So what keeps me up at night, a lot of times, and this sounds strange, but like pain in the world and how to be of service to it. And if I don't sleep, which does happen, I'll catch myself, you know, 5 or 6 days in of like bad sleep, being completely unproductive and not being able to be of service. So I have to start like kind of reprioritizing, like, well, how can I be of best service? One is to sleep. So
kind of self as instrument. You can't do the work that you love if your body's not functioning and keeping you healthy and able to.
Yeah, I mean, it's oxygen mask on yourself. You know, it's the old airline adage. It's like, if you can't take care of yourself, then, you know, you're going to have a short-lived adventure of taking care of other people, but then you'll be gone.
Is our current system immovable?
I mean, no. It's not immovable. I mean, there's so many kind of metaphors there, but the first one that comes to mind is like, when you start thinking about what's possible, and then when you see what COVID kind of exposed as what's possible, like the world shutting down, like literally shutting down, and you know, India seeing its skies for the first time in 25 years, and like all like the Earth's kind of like response to that, and blossoming and rebounding, and like is shutting down every industry in the world. Like, okay, everyone, it's like industry timeout. Like, stop creating, manufacturing, industrializing. No, that's not possible. But suddenly it is. Like,
But wait,
it's possible. So these systems that are so, you know, foundational, everything's immovable. There's been countless revolutions over the years. There's been thousands and thousands of different regime changes, and all of this happens while the Earth kind of just sits patiently and like lets us carve it out like a cancer. You know, remember the book The Giving Tree, where all that was left was like him sitting on this stump and the tree was still like, I still want to give to you. It's like, this is all I need right now. And right, Earth doesn't really care necessarily. Nature's going to go on, but we as human species, we're going to need to listen to the invitation that we've just been given. And I believe that this is probably the gentlest one that we'll receive. This is the first potentially of a drumbeat of many. And if we don't kind of heed the wisdom that's been offered to us, then, every year the fires, the hurricanes, everything is getting more and more dramatic every year. So I don't think it's impossible. I think it's necessary to shift some of these systems that are in place.
It's necessary. So how long is our window, would you say, to reimagine?
I mean, it kind of depends on who you ask. It's not
Mitch McConnell.
Well, I'll give you a couple of data points. David McConville, who's a dear friend and a mentor and just a hatcher, someone I admire a lot, was the president of the Buckminster Fuller Institute. And Bucky had this beautiful understanding of living systems and how everything's connected. And David is the one that really actually kind of sparked me wondering if I was being selfish by being tucked away up here in Montana, because he moved from Asheville, North Carolina to Oakland. And I was like, what? This is a man who loves just being surrounded by nature. And I flew down and had a beer with him. I was like, David, why did you come to Oakland? It's like, we have a 8 to 9 year window. I moved here to accelerate my work. I'm like, did you say 80 to 90 year window? He's like, no. I'm like, 8 to 9. So depending on which kind of belief system you ask or scientist you ask, we had Michelle Thaler on one of our global living rooms recently, who's a NASA astronomer. NASA had been working on and compiling this data for years, decades, and they just released it in April. And it was in the New York Times, and of course nobody really gives a shit because COVID's happening. Everyone's trying to figure out what's happening with me in my life.
And it's fake news anyway.
Right. So this report kind of hits the paper and kind of slides off, and nobody really pays attention. But in the global living room that we had with her, were you on that one?
I wasn't on that one. I've made a few of them though.
She starts to show the data. First of all, look at how beautiful this place is. Look at man, I'm just in love with this place called Earth. Look at it from afar. Look how beautiful. Look how intricate it. Just really setting that story up. And then and we have some new data recently that came out, and within the this data used to say that 190, 200 years from now, there would be 2 to 4 foot ocean rise. Well, that data, the new data now says that will happen within the lifetime of our children. So before this century is out, in the next 65, 75 years, there will be 2 to 4 foot ocean rise. And let me show you what that looks like on a map. And then when you start to show that shrinkage of inhabitable, what's currently the inhabited Earth, shrinking by 25%, all the coasts, all the and billions of people now being pushed into migration, redefining your perception of what's a refugee in our own country, in every island around the world that's going to disappear under 4 foot ocean rise. And that's already because of the carbon that's been emitted, not that we might still emit.
So the amount of carbon that has been emitted today that's currently in the atmosphere or I should say there's still one small piece of hope, but has the potential to create the 2 to 4 foot ocean rise. Is the hope planting trees?
Yes. And at the end of reforestation, carbon sequestration, moving from sustainability and sustainable to regeneration and regenerative. I think what's unfortunate is like a lot of large organizations have like, they're like, okay, we're going to onboard sustainable thinking. Like, sorry to tell you, but we blew right past that bus stop. We're now at regenerative. Like, we can't just rely on sustainable. Now we're in regenerative. And so it's just a different philosophy. You have to start thinking, design thinking through how whatever you're going to create gives back more than it takes.
So instead of just being sustainable and becoming carbon neutral, the regenerative process is a step beyond in regenerating the system and growing it again.
Exactly. And, we also had recently on one of our global living rooms, Janine Peñas, who's the co-founder with Bryony Schwan of the Biomimicry Institute. Yeah. And she has a project that they're working on right now, which is Project Positive. And it's essentially like a way of looking at development, architecture, building, but with a very specific set of criteria and lens, knowing that this, whatever it is that you're creating, will take into consideration the ecosystem that surrounds it, nutrients, minerals, water rights, like there's like a ton of data points, and we'll take all that stuff into consideration and then give you a recommendation on how you can create something that will actually give back to, it will take from and give back to its surroundings that creates a positive impact as opposed to an extractive one.
That's so cool. We've been nerding out on our food forest at Blunderbuss, and I've been learning all about regenerative qualities of how to develop just your own plot of land wherever you are and getting to know it and helping it kind of turn into that use.
So, I mean, the last time I was at Blunderbuss was 3 years ago, maybe?
I think so, yeah.
And today when I walked in, I was like, and first off, like, awesome, like, COVID procedures and so forth. But like, that part's probably irrelevant 2 years from now, 3 years from now. It'll be called something different.
Part of our time capsule.
It'll be a different coronavirus disease. But anyways, when I revisited today, I could see the evolution. It was just really fun to see, like, I mean, it's a big risk just to kind of buy a piece of property and a home and then you get other folks buy into a vision. But I'm seeing it manifest. It's really beautiful. Like everything was happening in the backyard with the greenhouse and the gardens and so forth. Like if everyone, there was an Anthony Mackie quote, who was a Hatcher Lung. He's you see him in The Avengers. He's an actor, and he's like, if everyone in the world, if everyone in the country, invested in their own backyard, the world would be a much better place. And that's what I thought of when I walked in. I was like, yeah, if everyone could just be this thoughtful and intentional about how they're, integrating and kind of respecting the place that they live on and looking to it for wisdom as well. Like, it's a...
I love that. Thanks. It reminds me, in the LGBT community, there's this piece that they call patchwork, and it's what you do when the government doesn't have your back. And so it's, for example, in Billings or in Bozeman and Missoula, because of this patchwork policy, you can't get fired for being gay or kicked out of your house. But in places like Billings and statewide, this exists. And so I kind of took patchwork to heart when it comes to developing, where if the government doesn't have your back, but you can do something, then you have to create that piece of patchwork to help wean the system off of it. Yeah.
I mean, you have some fairly impressive solar array panels back there.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. The septic system that you're redesigning, the garden, the greenhouse is like, I'm also really encouraged that so many very diverse friends of mine this year have kind of woken up to this idea possibility that they can live in a place that feeds them, that like, city dwellers are now thinking about moving to a place where they can have gardens and feed their family through the food that they grow and have a relationship with the soil and nature and just, understanding the wisdom of this vast living connected system that's existed for billions of years that we sort of traipse through and take for granted.
Do you think cities are dying? Or will cities reinvent how they grow their food and they'll survive somehow?
I think some cities will die. I think that there will always be people for cities.
Sure. Because of the culture and the fast pace.
It's like, for me, at the age of like 19, 20, 21, nobody was going to tell me I was going to stay in Montana. Like, I was out of here.
No thanks, yeah.
And so, and like, I couldn't wait to go to a place like New York or Los Angeles or Paris or whatever. It's like, and, that'll continue. Like, I can't remember the exact stats, but I'll just make numbers up for the sake of a conversation. But like, there's like 10 or 15 or 20,000 people that move to Los Angeles every day. There's equal or more than move out, right? And when I first moved there, I was making friends with everyone. I wanted to get to know them and like understand their stories and ask lots of questions, and then they wouldn't call back, and I just started recognizing, like, oh no, I'm sorry, I moved, and like, oh, and I moved, and I was like, oh, this kind of like a conveyor belt here of people. Like, I can't wait to get here, and then the system kind of like really puts you, like, tests your mettle, and it, like any good ecosystem, like a body is going to like, I don't think this is supposed to belong. I'm going to do everything I can to kind of push it to the outer, but if you are resilient and aren't going anywhere, like, it was like, okay, I'll cut you a break. It's
finally.
It's like, boom, look in your mailbox. It's like, there's an invitation to something. It's like, oh my gosh, like, okay, I've made the cut, but that, cities won't die because there will always be people that are rolling through it. I think what's different now is that places like Montana, we already had kind of one awakening to Montana in 1994, I think it was when River Runs Through It came out. And
Brad Pitt.
Yeah. And in that film, Robert Redford, like, that film forever changed the trajectory of this state. It romanticized fly fishing. You look back at the numbers of the real estate and tourism industry and just even the industry of fly fishing. Like, there was a massive like inflection point there, and we're having kind of a second round of that right now, with a very different kind of context and personality around it, but there's a mass exodus of folks that are leaving cities to rebuild a place that has more space and natural air and smaller community and authenticity. I don't know. I don't think cities are going to die. I think they're just going to slowly serve a different purpose, become almost kind of like industrial centers.
To be present in for industry and then vacate.
Yeah, or that's where all the kind of, like Detroit's, Pittsburgh's, like these very industrial cities that live and die by big machinery driven industries. Like, I think cities are, we've definitely been shown a different way that even in a tech company, we don't have to show up in the office like, oh, hey, there's your face. I didn't have to get on a plane and fly across the country. And I'm with my family for an extra 4 hours. Like, I have one person in the Hatch community who is the CEO of a company that has 65,000 employees in Delhi, India. And the third, fourth, fifth week of, COVID over there, it was like, we had this conversation like, man, it's been rough to get everyone to work from home. And yet, none of these people can afford to live in the city center. They all live 2 to 2.5 hours outside of the city center. So that's 2 to 2.5 hours on the way in on these machines that spew out all sorts of gas and emissions. And then on the way back home, they get 4 hours back in their life to be with their family. Their sense of their spirit is different. Their energy is different. And think about 65,000 employees not driving 4 hours a day in that one city times 300 days times X amount of companies in that city times X amount of cities across the world. Think about the impact of that reciprocal exponential with, Jesus. And you could see how the earth responded. So, I just think that cities can be rethought. Urban centers expand people's worldviews. There's just needs to be a lot of reinvention.
What does the world look like if we fix all of the problems that are broken at this moment?
Hatch. I say that a little tongue in cheek, but you're in this bubble. Let me rephrase that. Being present in the moment, being for each other, wanting to be of service, having the luxury and privilege to be able to be of service because you're not fighting for survival. There's a lot of levels of that. Nature works 99% of the time in collaboration and not competition. And, if we solved all the world's problems, which is going to take some significant retooling in some countries that might take a couple centuries, just equity, love, people not competing and working together. It's like it's working more like nature.
Are there any practices that you can share that have changed your life to make you more sustainable or regenerative?
I really do consciously practice listening.
Yeah. You've mentioned being present a few times, and one thing that Pete Strom has kind of influenced us both with, along with integral facilitation, is how to be a good listener.
Yeah.
And that is meaningful. It's incredibly effective with problem solving.
Yeah. We projecting the solutions on something that you don't have understanding of, right? I think they call that like flyby white savior syndrome. It's like,
I'll show you the way to the good life.
Yeah, let me land in this new country that I've never been to and bring you all the answers. Well, I think you have some listening to do first to fully understand. And even then, it's like help. What are you trying to solve, and how can I be of service? Like they know the answer. Whoever you're projecting to try to help accelerate a solution for. Oftentimes they don't really, and now I'm shifting into almost kind of like corporate speak for a second, but in some of the conversations we've had around Hatch Labs, they think they are asking the right question. And so you just keep asking questions to get them to ask you the question, and that question keeps changing and evolving. And then essentially you're like, oh, I understand. But even then, they don't fully understand until the end of the exercise. If you just told them right then, oh, what you're really trying to solve for is X, Y, and Z, they're like, nah, that's not what we're trying to solve for. So anyway, listening and patience, agility, fluidity, problem solving, creativity. The things that I rely on, the things that get me through. I happen to surround myself with a lot of beautiful minds that I learn from. But I would definitely say sharpen those specific tools in your tool shed that are empathy, listening, creativity. The rest kind of will lead toward critical problem solving and critical thinking and so forth. creativity is one that definitely should not be. People are like, I'm not creative. It's like, you just haven't really found your version of creativity yet. It's like,
That's so true. There's so
everyone's-
many different versions of creativity.
yeah.
I used to be afraid of humanities in high school because I didn't quite understand it, and now I'm just full in completely, and I've found a real creative place that I love. But it took a while. It takes a while to find what you're creative at and what kind of what. It's hard to find purpose sometimes.
Yeah. The invitation to even go through the thought exercise, like, is a valuable one. Like, if I had an ask for anyone on this call, or if I had an ask for anyone on this podcast listening right now, like, go through that thought exercise with someone else. Ask them the question of, like, hey, what's your real life superpower? What is a skill that you've wanted to enhance? Like, what keeps you up at night? Like, these questions that get people thinking deeper, knock rocks loose toward progress within that individual, and then it becomes an aggregate of a lot of individuals being realized.
I love that question. I think you and I kind of struggle, or have struggled, with whether I should be a nonprofit or a for-profit, or how the mechanics of that work. I think that there's a lot of baggage that comes with capitalism. What's your relationship to money and your organizations? Like, I'll just leave it at that.
Well, I'm going to work backwards toward that question, but the first thing that kind of popped in my mind was this conversation I had recently with Denise Hearn on the Global Living Room around this book that she created called The Myth of Capitalism. And the myth is that it's there for everyone. And when you start to kind of unpack how the systems are stacked against certain people, that dream is different. Like, when you ask me what my relationship to money is, it's usually the last thing on my mind all the time, and oftentimes to a fault. Like, even Hatch, it's like, I made my living as a film director and a marketer for 14 or 15 years of Hatch. We're entering into our 18th year. So it was 100% nonprofit, volunteer driven, not one paid staff, never took any funds from any of the money that we raised. And, I was like, wow, like, I'm so proud of, like, this is where we pour our passion, but over here is where we make our money. And then it was like the realization, like, well, the two are a little bit in tug of war right now. I just really want to think about one and not the other. So then I had to put a business lens on Hatch. Like, well, we have to start charging people to come to the summits. We have to, how much does it cost to put 150 people up, and how much does it cost to feed them? And then like, well, we got to build a little bit on there for a salary if I'm going to stop paying my mortgage with this other job that I used to have. So I kind of stepped off the cliff and had about a year where that, there wasn't a cloud that kind of landed under my foot. I went into more debt and, just really kept my belief in that, drilling down on what we wanted to do with Hatch. Putting a business lens on it, I oftentimes really wish that I had gone to business school, or that I had a father that had instilled more of these practices in me, and understanding how to be fiscally literate and understanding how to be financially strategic. Like, man, I wish that I had that foundation. I really do. And I don't undermine it, I don't scoff it. I long for that knowledge, really, that background. I've tried to pick up as much as I can along the way, but now, like, I want to build systems that generate revenue, because all I want to do is just be able to self-fund. I don't want to have to be reliant on other systems and
Begging for money.
Yeah, and banging on doors all the time and asking people, and it feels like such an imposition. It's like creating a sustainable model means putting a very business lens on something. Capitalism is capitalism. Like, I'm sorry it gets kind of lumped in with a bunch of things that are negative, but the core of its original principle was how to create sustainable systems. And in that sense, like, if you could optimize the original, like if its current version of that could meet the original intention again, we'd be in good shape. I mean, there's a graphic out there that shows Jeff Bezos' wealth by pixel in relationship to all of the world needs. Like 5 years of every single person's healthcare being paid for is like 2 pixels on this thing that you have to like scroll for. Like, his worth is like the person that put this visual graphic together. You're scrolling for a while. At first, it's kind of like dropping these little data points and it's keeping you moving. And then you go for a long time without seeing anything. And just about the time you're like, oh, maybe that was it. It's like, nope, still going. Like, there's a sense of humor there, but there's also a question that really must be asked by those that, in technology specifically, that have the capacity to put an end to a lot of suffering. Like, it's not as simple as like, okay, I'm going to give $20 billion away. Like, where does it go? What's the due diligence? People are greedy. Systems are flawed. Like,
what will distribute it?
Yeah. How does it actually, how do you ensure that it does what you want it to do? It gets to the right, like, that part is so broken too. But regardless, the wealth exists to solve those problems, to create those oversights. And
I was imagining you as you were talking about not learning how business when you were little. Do you think would that have tethered your creativity?
I don't know. Maybe, right? Like, I have a hard time envisioning that I think the creativity that I have, granted, it has continued to be like fostered and so forth, but like is a real core part of my DNA. Like, it just is. I think it's very similar to you. Like, you're just a maker, right? Granted, there's a lot of things that could have happened to have impacted or mitigated or compromised creativity in a lot of things, but like, I wish that I had had the opportunity to be more creative with the business lens, with understanding how these larger systems work. And I feel like I have a cohesive perspective on how multiple systems are connected now. And if I had that other base then, to your point, like, it's entirely possible I could have got sucked into the world of hedge funds or something like that, and
yeah, and you could have probably been offered that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, who knows? Like, no one knows what could have happened in the past, but even now when young filmmakers or photographers or artists or creatives ask me advice about, going to college and so forth, they're like, well, just make sure you take a business class. Because no matter what you do as an entrepreneur, as a maker, as an inventor, you need a base to understand that sort of kind of methodology of how data storytelling, making a case for understanding projections, who's the customer, like, is there a real need there? Like, it would just save so much energy and time and wasted talent if people had that capacity to understand, like, that's already been solved.
Don't reinvent the wheel.
Google it.
Yeah. Business. Yeah. I started in business, so I had a good head around it before I entered design school, but all of my design friends could have used a business class, I think.
Well, you just gave me a big insight right there, because I remember when you were still in school, launching all the initiatives you were launching around town, and not to say that I'm putting the credit onto that, but there was a certain organization to your creative deployment that was unique.
Thanks. Yeah, I suppose it was before the university had the launch pad, and so I found myself getting a lot of independent. I think the last couple of years of school, I must have gone through 6 independent studies because they didn't have the classes tailored enough for what I wanted.
Yeah,
and so it was pretty cool. So I just chasing that energy again. this weekend we've got this debate called OK Boomer, and there's this guy named Shane. He's Gen Z, and he has basically described his entrance into the world as being born into his house being on fire. What, with all the insurmountable work ahead of us, what do we have to remain hopeful?
It's an interesting segue. I have so many questions about what you said first. Like, is this what's? I mean, it sounds like we don't want to get too personal, but like, what does this person do now? Like, I'm curious about the story now. What's the arc?
I think a lot of young people who didn't experience Al Gore ringing the climate emergency bell.
Oh, the house on fire on planet Earth.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because that could mean
The metaphorical house.
a lot of different things. Sorry, I was thinking about something different.
First, get your mom out.
Yeah, exactly. What is there to remain hopeful about? The first thing I think about when you ask me that question, there's a Jane Goodall quote that she's like, thousands of years from now, a species very much like ours will look back and wonder how we could let all of these other species just die. And yet there's so much to remain hopeful for. And if we fall into a state of apathy, there's no hope. All is lost. And so, the other analogy is like that, the young kid that's walking along the seashore throwing, I don't know if they're clams, is throwing these clams. Starfish, right? It's like throwing these starfish back in the ocean, and the guy's like, hey, like it doesn't make any difference. He's like, well, it did to that one. Like, both of those, if we, and think about, like, here we are in this kind of moment before a very historic election. Every vote, every voice, every person, every intention, every wish, every dream counts. And if that were true, it would be a very powerful world, and it can be true, and it is true, but they have to believe that. And if they don't believe that, then it's not true. So it's a self-fulfilling destiny. It's like you will see it when you believe it. Not, I'll believe it when I see it. You will see it when you believe it. And if we remain hopeful, everything is everything's hopeful. I mean, right now, this is like one of the darkest times I can remember. And yet, I feel like it's an opportunity as a reset button. So I get, I'm kind of an optimist anyway. I've been beaten down a lot of times, and this is definitely one of those years where you ebb and flow through hope and believing the thing that you're telling yourself. But if we don't, then we're fucked. So, like, just you have to stay the course and like double down, like lean in harder, because this is where it gets tough. This is where it gets weeded out. This is where people give up. It's like, oh shit, I almost made it to the summit of Everest. It's like, but you didn't. Like right now, we're like almost at that summit, and we have to just keep pushing forward.
Yarrow Kraner, the founder of the Hatch Network. Thanks for being here.
Oh, man. What a pleasure.
We're just about at our 2-hour point, so that was great. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah. I just want to just kind of double down on that one more time. Like, just to really meditate on that premise of you will see it when you believe it. It's like if we all sat back and kind of envisioned the world that we wished for, if we all did that, if we all did that simultaneously, that would be really powerful. It would accelerate, the energy in the universe to kind of manifest that and conspire to make that happen. But the invitation is really to think about what that is. And, if you're interested in learning more about what we do at Hatch, check out our website. Hopefully Tate will share it with you, and
You can say it right now and we'll share it.
hatchexperience.org. Next year in 2021, we built out these experiences called Portal, which will take you kind of deep into some of your own growth and an entrance into this larger global community. So, at any rate,
It's great. I love it.
love you.
I think I signed up for it. The port, is it the app? Hatch 360.
No, the H360 Hatch 360 app is a machine learning app that connects needs and solutions. It's to power organizations and communities and to fully untap the full potential, the human potential and capacity within an organization. It's like, I didn't know that you had these, 3 programming languages and you spoke this other language, you play guitar, you were passionate about climate change or clean water, all the things that make us human. Like the data points that current social media measures match us up with are superfluous, and like, oh, you went to high school with this person, like, great, I'm more passionate right now about human rights. Where are my people in human rights? So to match you up with, we're trying to triangulate right now large organizations that have, tens of thousands of employees that are becoming increasingly purpose and impact driven. It's going to become a competitive advantage to onboard those, like the brightest young talent will not work for your company if you don't have purpose and impact. So now it's competitive. They have to go create on-ramps to purpose and impact to go recruit the brightest talent, because Gen Z will only take their minds and their hearts to places of impact and purpose. So even if it's a big tech company, they have to have a plan in place to allow on-ramps for those, that impact and purpose. This platform can mobilize, mass employee engagement and connect them with places like Hatch and Interchange and nonprofits. It's like, oh, I'm interested in this. And is the location important? Yes or no? Like, what's in my area? I'm just curious. It'll start to matchmake you and start mobilizing and connecting people that have specific skill sets that they want to donate. But then I think the coolest part for me is, in my mind at least, is that, and what we're building is this shared database of impact projects. So now you have, eventually tens of thousands of organizations and nonprofits sharing a centralized database where you can push projects out into it. You're behind your own closed data shell, but once you push projects out into this kind of central collaboration sphere, then that whole mycelial network, the needs and solutions start to connect, and we can really start, like right now, none of these impact projects communicate with each other. There's a lot of people working in silos with a lot of brilliant minds and strategies and plans and funding. They're like one trench over, and they don't even know that they exist. And like, geez, if they only knew that each other existed, they could use half the resources and make 3 times the impact. So that's what we're building with H360.
Love that. Love you back. Thanks, Yarrow.
Tate, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Hey, I wish you a happy and healthy COVID holiday season.
Thank you. I will take that and be as healthy as I can. I think the cases are supposed to rise, but I wish you a happy and healthy COVID season also.
And antisocial. We'll see you in
However-
2021.